For centuries, alchemists promised and failed to transform lead into gold. But that's not the surprising part. What is surprising is that after each debunking, they would manage to repeat the same promise and convince even more people. It would always come with a new salesman and some flashy new jargon, always designed to dupe yet another group of people who had dreams of gold. Today's alchemist-in-chief, the Liberal Prime Minister, promises to transform deficits into investments. This is not a new promise. It is exactly the same one that Justin Trudeau ran on in 2015. Remember, he said the budget would balance itself. Now, to be fair to him, we all thought it was just a gaffe. What he actually meant was that deficit spending would spark investment, which would grow the economy, generating enough money for, well, the budget to balance itself. The current Prime Minister had a slightly more sophisticated sounding, but similar idea, which is spend less and invest more. But given that this has been, he's now taken office and accelerated the spending, doubled the debt, it's now time, doubled the deficit, it is now time for us to consider the actual results. So what actually happened, Mr. Speaker? Well, since the Liberal government took office, the debt has doubled, growth has stalled, investment has fallen, the budget did not balance itself, and, of course, lead did not become gold. Let's look at the facts. The core facts, Mr. Speaker, are these. Under this government, Canada has had the single worst growth in investment per capita of any country in the G7. In fact, as the member for Newmarket Aurora will tell you, with whom I'm splitting my time, in fact, the reality is that Canada's, if you take total investment divided by the number of workers in Canada, we get about $15,000 in investment per worker. Barely half of the $29,000 in the United States, and a third lower than the $24,000 across the OECD. The result has been that we have had the worst per capita GDP growth in the G7. And dressing up these deficits in a banker's suit has not made any difference, because since this Prime Minister took office, doubling the deficit, that is the rate at which we add new debt, we've actually seen investment drop by $54 billion, and just the other day he promised that his policies would drive another $1 trillion out of this country into the United States, proving once again the result that deficits do not equal investment. Now, why is this? Well, there are a number of reasons. First, everything comes from something. So there are only two ways for governments to run deficits: print it or borrow it. If they print it, they cause inflation, which drives up interest rates, which drives down investment. If they borrow it, they have to borrow it from somebody. So they borrow it out of the private economy to put it into the government economy, which means the money that has been borrowed away from private investors is no longer available for productive investments in factories, mines, pipelines, new technology, or other income-generating assets. In other words, when government runs deficits, it does not create net economic activity, it simply shifts the activity away from productive private sector activity towards unproductive bureaucratic inactivity. Mr. Speaker, they move the money from where it is efficient to where it is inefficient. Second reason, by the way, that is called the crowding out effect. It is well known that this happens, and that is why deficits have coincided with drops in investment in most countries around the world. The second reason is that today's deficits are tomorrow's taxes, and everybody knows that. So what do businesses and individuals do when they see governments racking up massive deficits? They hoard their cash, waiting for the eventual tax bill. We saw this during COVID, when you would talk to small businesses who would say, with all this debt, I'm holding on to my wallet because I know that a big tax hike is coming, and they put the money under their bed. They don't invest it, they don't spend it, they wait for it to be taxed away later on. This is what economists call the Ricardian equivalent, and it proves very much that there is no net economic activity that results from government deficits. In fact, it only subtracts because it subtracts from the productive investments that people might otherwise make but are suspended into terror that they will have a future tax liability and therefore do not make those investments at all. What we have seen is that when you cut deficits, you actually increase investment. Governments across Canada slashed deficits in the 1990s. We saw a resulting boom in investment. The greatest example of all is Israel. Back in the 90s, Israel was running massive deficits, which required the government of that country pay out 6% yields on their bonds. So investors could, in a very lazy way, simply buy government bonds instead of taking risks on productive investments, and that led to poor economic growth. When they started to cut the deficits and, in fact, balance their budget, the investors no longer could lend to the government. And so they had to invest in productive assets. This caused a boom in startups to the point where Israel now has the single highest density of high-tech companies in the world. They have more companies, for a country of 10 million people, has more companies listed on the NASDAQ than all of Europe combined, a continent with 75 times more people. By cutting deficits, you force investors to invest in productive assets like technological booms that we saw in Israel. The reason, the Prime Minister will say he can get a better return on investment with his government-made investments in big economic projects. But the question is this, two questions. If the projects you want to invest in, if they are money losers, why would the government want to invest in them? If they're money makers, why would the government need to invest in them? If a project is going to lose money, then going forward with it makes us all poorer. If it is a mega project, it makes us a lot poorer. The logic of going ahead with massive projects that lose money is like the businessman who says, I lose money on every single sale, but I make it up on volume. Mr. Speaker, we don't need money-losing projects. We need money-making projects by having the fastest permits in the OECD, getting rid of the capital gains tax on reinvestments, having lower marginal taxes on our highest achievers. In other words, the government needs only to get out of the way. Stop telling us you're going to turn deficits into investment or lead into gold. All they need to do is get out of the way and allow Canadians to dig the beautiful gold mine that is right under our feet in Canada.
Questions and comments? Questions and commentaires. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Government House Leader.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, no one in Canada has travelled Canada as much as the Leader of the Conservative Party has to tell Canadians that Canada is broken. Mr. Speaker, I challenge the Leader in terms of even his comments today. Think in terms of the deficit. If you think of it in the terms of Canada has the lowest to GDP net deficit than any other of the G7 countries. The G7 includes countries like the USA, the United Kingdom, Germany, and others. We are the lowest. Would he then argue that all those other countries are broken too?
Leader of the Official Opposition.
Well, first of all, Mr. Speaker, the Liberals' argument is that they're just not as bankrupt as the other countries is not actually true, even if it were a good argument. To start with, Canada's debt is much higher than most G7 countries when you include all debt levels, both public and private. Because the Liberals have indebted our households, because they have indebted our households with high taxes and high inflation, then I'll give a little lesson to the members across the way. We have one economy that has to pay the interest of all the debt in the country. The Government of Canada does not have a monopoly on the entire GDP. That GDP has to fund interest and debt servicing for households, businesses, and governments. And because this Liberal government has indebted our businesses and households to a level that we are now one of the most indebted nations in the world on a per GDP basis, we've run very real risks that higher interest rates will absolutely cripple our economy. We need a paycheck economy, not a debt economy.
Yeah. Questions and comments? Questions et commentaires. Le député de Drummond.
The Honourable Member for Drummond. The Liberals are boasting about their record. Mr. Speaker, as I was saying earlier, They boast about lowering interest rates and reducing the fiscal burden on middle-class families. But in fact, people actually have more and more debt and are finding it harder and harder to pay the bills. The Conservatives are saying that we need to make major cuts in the public service. I'd like to hear from the Leader of the Opposition. What will he concretely do to help Canadian and Quebec families? The Honourable Leader of the Opposition. We will cut red tape. We will cut consultants. We will cut foreign aid. We will cut the funds that are currently being given to false refugees, and much more. We will reduce the size of the state to reduce the costs of living, taxes. We know that this government is causing inflation by printing money. My colleague mentioned interest rates. The governor of the Bank of Canada said not that the inflation rate is low, but that the unemployment rate is high. And that is why he needed to reduce interest rates. We have the weakest economy in the G7. Despite these Liberals' promises, we need to turn that around with a new Conservative government.
Comments, questions et commentaires. The Honourable Member from Vaughan Woodbridge.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I'd like to thank the Leader of the Opposition for his speech. Mr. Speaker, there seems to be a theme emerging here. We have capital flight at an alarming rate in this country. We have a productivity crisis. And from the Liberals on the other side of the aisle, all we hear is it's not our fault. So I'm wondering if the Leader of the Opposition could highlight all the negative consequences of Liberal policy and, what exactly the one simple thing they could do to fix it.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, that seems to be the current Liberal Prime Minister's approach, just like the prior Liberal Prime Minister. They can't do anything about the fact that we've lost $500 billion of investment. They can't do anything about the fact that we're the fastest shrinking economy in the G7 with the second highest unemployment. They can't do anything about the fact that we have the lowest investment per worker of any country. Well, if they can't do anything, maybe it's time for them to get out of the way, because we can over here. I'll tell you what we'll do. We'll cut taxes on work, investment, energy, and home building. Mr. Speaker, we will eliminate the production cap, the ban on offshore shipping of oil, the industrial carbon tax. We will rapidly approve projects, have the fastest building permits anywhere in the world. We will open Canada up for business and make this the richest nation on earth.
Resuming debate. Reprise de débat.